Dear students, hello and welcome to this video lesson in which we will deal with the two lessons, theories of first language acquisition and theories of second language acquisition. We start with first language acquisition theories. Basically, we will deal with three theories: the behaviorist, the nativistic, and the cognitive approach. So what is the behaviorist theory? The behaviorist psychologists developed their theories while carrying out a series of experiments on animals. They observed that rats or birds, for example, can be taught to perform various tasks by encouraging habit formation. Researchers rewarded this desirable behavior, and this was known as positive reinforcement. Undesirable behavior was punished or simply not rewarded, and this is the negative reinforcement. Take, for instance, the example I gave in the previous lesson about the child who gives the same utterance to two entities. For instance, bua for water and the same utterance for a piece of bread. We'll come to it later. Basically, the behaviorist view was extended to language acquisition by Skinner, who suggested that a child imitates the language of its parents or carers. Successful attempts are rewarded because an adult who recognizes a word spoken by a child will praise the child and or give it what it is asking for. When the child asks for bua and the adult understands that it is water, while the child means a piece of bread, and when the adult gives them water, the child is going to refuse it and say no, bua. So here he's emphasizing on another entity. But the adult does not recognize which entity is meant by this utterance. So here we are going to have a negative reinforcement for this behavior, and thus the child is going to forget about the second entity and will only associate the term bua with the first entity, which is water. So successful utterances are therefore reinforced while unsuccessful ones are forgotten. Now we understand that the behaviorist theory of Skinner is based on a chain of stimuli and responses, and that imitation and reinforcement are the basis for this theory. Take here this quote by Harley, where he says that children learn language in the same way rats learn to navigate a maze for the reward of a food pellet. So here we understand how they extended their behaviorist theory from animals' behaviors to language acquisition. Now we move to the nativistic theory of Chomsky, who criticized the previous theory of Skinner as language is a creative entity bound by a set of rules, and the simple mechanisms of the stimulus-response model cannot allow children to learn an immense quantity of words. So we know that languages are very rich with the words, millions of words. Are they going to be acquired, all of them, through this simple mechanism of stimulus and response? Are they going to be all imitated? So how much time will it take for a child to learn all these words? So the nativists believe in the existence of a language acquisition device, which is the LAD. This device enables them to acquire a language in a highly restrictive way. For example, the LAD already contains the concept of verb tense. By Listening to such forms as worked, played, and patted, the child will form the hypothesis that the past tense of verbs is formed by adding the sound the, to, or it for the base form. This is about the nativist theory. Now we move to the cognitive approach by John Piaget. John Piaget describes the linguistic development in the child as an interaction between his developing cognitive capacities and linguistic experience, i.e. there is a correlation between the child's capacities of his brain and the development of his linguistic experience. Piaget here argued that a child has to understand a concept before she or he can acquire the particular language form which expresses that concept. For instance, the child has to know what is a table, the concept itself, before it attributes a label to this concept, which is a table. Piaget suggested that a child who had not yet reached this stage would not be able to learn and use comparative adjectives like bigger or smaller, for instance. This view refuses the specific mental faculty that enables language acquisition. So, the cognitive approach is opposing the nativistic approach, which itself is opposing Skinner's approach, which is the behaviorist one. Now, let's move to the second part of this lesson, second language acquisition theories. We start with the acquisition learning hypothesis, which distinguishes between the processes of language acquisition and language learning. Krashen contrasts acquisition and learning as two distinct and separate language processes. He emphasizes on the difference between both processes. Acquisition is not learning. Acquisition occurs passively and unconsciously through implicit, informal, or natural learning, which results in implicit knowledge and acquired competence of a language. Like the acquisition of a child, the child is not learning his first language, rather he is acquiring it. To acquire a language is to pick up the language by relying on feelings of correctness rather than conscious knowledge of language rules. So when we learn a language, we rely on the rules we learned. But when we acquire a language and we speak this language, we rely on our feelings of correctness. Okay? So people whose first language is English know implicitly the rules, the grammar rules. And they just produce them. And they rely on their feelings of correctness. They don't know the rule itself, but they know that when you say, for example, he's speaking, they know that it's not he speaking, it's he is speaking. This is their feeling of correctness. But they do not know they do not focus on the rule that he plus is plus verb, stem plus ing is the rule for the present continuous. So, to sum it up, we recognize that the two types of knowledge are used differently. The acquired system is used to produce utterances, and the learned one is used to check their correctness. Furthermore, the acquisition learning hypothesis states that both children and adults acquire language via access to an innate language acquisition device, which is the LAD, i.e. both children and adults acquire language by means of the LAD, regardless of their age. The hypothesis also states that learning cannot become acquisition. The most important pedagogical implication of this first hypothesis is that explicit teaching and learning is unnecessary, indeed inadequate for second language acquisition. Question always focuses on the natural learning, the natural acquisition of the language. And here we go to the natural order hypothesis. This natural order hypothesis applies to both first language acquisition and second language acquisition. We acquire the rules of language in a predictable order, some rules tending to come early and others late. The natural order cannot be changed by instruction, i.e., if the third person of the present is acquired naturally before the possessive S, so in learning grammar rules, the same order is followed. We cannot change the order. If we change the order, it's not going to occur properly. The natural order of acquisition presumes to be the result of the acquired system. Now we move to the monitor hypothesis. The monitor hypothesis complements the acquisition learning theory or the acquisition learning hypothesis by claiming that the only function of learning within second language acquisition is as an editor or a monitor. So for language use produced by the acquired system as well as to produce grammatical forms not yet acquired. The monitor here allows the language user to alter the form of an utterance either prior to production by consciously applying learned rules or after production via self-correction. In other words, the learned system monitors the output of the acquired system. This is what we mean here. The learned system monitors the output of the acquired system. We have also to mention that in order for the monitor to work, it needs time. It needs focus on the form and a well understanding of the rule to be able to correct the wrong utterances. So when someone is acquiring the language, so here they acquire it naturally. But after, there is the monitor hypothesis which complements this acquisition learning hypothesis. It says that the only function of learning here, when we learn a second language, it is just to correct the first language acquisition rules, let's say, or output. When here, let's say, someone who is acquiring, a child who acquired his first language, which is English, he knows how to speak it, he relies on his feelings of correctness, and when he goes to school and he studies in deep the grammatical forms of English, so here he's going to use the monitor, his monitor, to produce or to correct the forms he already has. Now, let's move to the fourth and the fifth hypothesis. The fourth hypothesis, the input one, it posits the process that allows second language learners to move through the predictable sequence of the acquisition of grammatical structures predicted by the natural order hypothesis. According to the input hypothesis, second language learners require comprehensible input. This comprehensible input represented by I plus 1. Here it is. The I plus 1. I stands for the actual level of acquisition, and plus 1 is a little beyond the current understanding of the language learner. With understanding here, we mean understanding of meaning rather than understanding of form. So the input hypothesis implies that the input must be a little beyond the current understanding of the language learner. Focusing on meaning, not on form, okay? Now the last one, which is the affective filter hypothesis, considers how emotional and intuitive factors impact the language acquisition process, including motivation, self-confidence, and anxiety. The affective hypothesis, credited to Stephen Krashen, declares that students' anxiety, low self-esteem, or lack of motivation can serve to cause a mental block, preventing the successful acquisition of a second language. How comes? So this implies that if the affective filter is lowered, so how do we lower the affective filter? We lower it by creating a learning environment in which students are more motivated and suffer from less anxiety and low self-esteem. For the possibility of success in achieving second language acquisition here is greatly improved when we create a learning environment, a relaxing learning environment. However, if the filter is high and students suffer from anxiety, less understanding, or they suffer from anxiety and less motivation and self-esteem, here they are more likely to fail to the acquisition of a second language. Now we understand that the affective filter hypothesis focuses on the creation of a suitable learning environment to help learners acquire the second language properly. Here we come to an end. Thank you for your attention. For your questions, please contact me on these on my contacts here on the email, Moodle or Google Classroom, or on the comment section on YouTube. Thank you again. See you soon.